What would you do if your spouse and life partner knowingly infected you with HIV and kept the information secret for years after? For my next guest, this was and is her reality, but instead of letting this hurtful act rule over her life, she reclaimed her power through her faith. Renee LadyByrd Burgess joins us next.
Justice for you and me. Justice for Mike Brown.
No peace.
After the death that shook the entire country, I decided to step up as a community activist and create a global podcast, Woke by Accident. Here, I amplify compelling news stories and matters impacting African Americans and their communities. My goal is to give a voice to the voiceless and have the difficult conversations needed to advance relations and matters of race. Tune in to Woke by Accident podcast. I am your host, Jen, and it is streaming on all of your favorite streaming platforms, as well as our website, www.wokebyaccident.net. Thank you for listening and take care. Welcome to another episode of Woke by Accident podcast. Today we have a special guest, Renee LadyByrd Burgess. Lady Bird is an activist and motivational speaker whose purpose is to spread awareness of HIV and AIDS through her education and sharing her story. Welcome to the show, Renee.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm glad to have you here, and definitely glad to be able to share this with our listeners about your story. I wanted to share a few statistics I came across that I found interesting. This information comes from Gilead Sciences, and it reflects that there are approximately 1.2 million people in the U.S. who have HIV, and 13% of them don't know it and need testing. In 2019, 34,800 new infections in the U.S. represented, which actually was a decrease from 2015. The one about African Americans I found interesting. In 2018, Black people made up 13% of the population, but accounted for 42% of the new HIV diagnosis. And as of 2018, an estimated 40% of people living with HIV were Black people. So very shocking statistics, which weigh heavily with African Americans, which resonates in our community so much. And I heard you speaking, and I definitely wanted to tap in with you to share this with the community. Please share your story and what inspired you to share with others.
Yeah, sure. So definitely going to be making this long story very short.
Okay.
But I met my husband, the first person I had ever married. I met him in September of 2003. We were only friends at the time, and we decided a couple years later, probably about 2 going on 3 years later, that we were going to have a relationship, and we became in a relationship. And probably once we got to about a year in that relationship, we started having serious conversations because, after a while, it's like, what are we doing? Are we going to stay in a relationship? Are we going to talk about marriage? What are we doing? So we started discussing marriage, and it just became a mutual agreement between us throughout our conversation that we wanted to get married. Now, he had previously been married. I had never been married before. He had children from his previous marriage. I had a daughter from a previous relationship. So we were kind of coming together, blending family, things like that. And by December 2006, I found myself relocating to where he was. At the time, I was living in Jacksonville, Florida. He was in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And so I relocated where he was at in South Carolina and got myself enrolled in school, got me a full-time job, and we were living together. And that decision was basically one of those things we also discussed because I had never lived with anyone. I wanted to be sure that this was something that I wasn't just jumping into and would be uncomfortable. I wanted to make sure that I was doing the right thing and taking this next step, because it was a really huge, big step for me. And so we're living together, and it comes to a point, the summer of 2007, I say to him, well, it's time for me to go and to get my HIV testing done. Now, this is something I had done yearly. I had been a medical assistant and a phlebotomist since 2004. So this was something that I did yearly, because you never know, you get stuck by a needle. You just never know. And
Right.
I have a high tolerance to pain. So I could have gotten stuck by a needle and never known it. So I always made sure I went and got tested yearly. And so we go, I say, well, let's go to your primary care physician. Since we're getting married, I can go ahead and establish myself as a patient and get the testing done. So we're at the doctor's office. We're getting our testing done, and I'm in one room, he's in the other room getting tested. And that's that. Now, in 2007, there was no such thing as getting a quick test done. You weren't going in, oh, you get your results in 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No, you went in, they drew your blood, and you waited 2 full weeks, sometimes longer. So when we got our results back, our agreement was that we would come back together in front of the doctor, and we were going to tell each other what our test results were. Like, this was a whole discussion. It wasn't just like we pulled this thought out of thin air. Like, I'm a very, very big on communication. So, this is something that we had discussed, and we sat in front of the doctor. I told him I was negative. He told me he was negative. And that was that. And, we had a wedding date set for August 4th of 2007. And the week leading up to the wedding, probably midweek, we get here to Florida, because the wedding happened here in Florida. And we get to his mom's house. Everybody's getting situated, settled in. His mom pulls me out into her garage, and she says to me, has he ever mentioned anything to you about HIV? And I'm looking at her like, what are you talking about? And I asked her that. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? She's like, well, just go ask him about HIV. Now, what I have to always remind people is, this is not like a one-time thing where I'm just meeting his mom for the first time. I knew his mom before I knew him. His mom is who introduced me to him. And so leading up throughout our relationship and saying we were getting married, I was going to lunch, dinner, breakfast with his mom. She literally was there while I was picking out my wedding dress. So I always tell people, at any point, she could have came to me and said that same thing to me prior to a couple days before the wedding, but that never happened. And so we're here, we're a couple days to the wedding. She says this to me. So I've always been the type of person, I don't like hearsay. So I say, okay, you wait right here. I told her to stay right here. I go into the house and I asked him, can you come out into the garage? Your mom wants me to ask you something, and I want to ask you with her present. Bring him out. We're all three standing here. And I look at him and I say, well, your mom told me to ask you about HIV. What is she talking about? And just as like no thought of it whatsoever, he just comes out of his mouth and he says, I don't know what she's talking about. I don't know why she told you to ask me that. So now I'm looking at his mom like, okay, you just told me to ask him that. What? Like, I'm waiting to see her next reaction. Because at this point, I'm just like, okay. And she did not part her lip. She didn't say anything. She just had this look on her face. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. It wasn't a shocked look. It wasn't a like, boy, you lying look. It was literally just a way she was looking. Like, she could have easily opened her mouth and said, you know, you're lying. You know this, like, it was so many things that could have been intervened in that very moment. But she didn't say anything. So as far as I understood, and I knew that we were both negative, because we went and got tested. We both told each other we were negative at the doctor's office. That was what I was going by solely, because again, she never interrupted or rebutted what he said. So we move forward. August 4th comes. We get married. Our wedding night was the first time ever that we had unprotected sex. So even if we had sex prior to marriage, we was always with a condom. And so fast forward, it's October 2007, find out I'm pregnant. So I schedule an appointment to go get my prenatal labs done. And they do the typical, they get your history and physical information, they get family history, and they do labs. They draw your blood, they get your prenatal labs so they can see where you're standing at the beginning of your pregnancy. So everything's fine. I'm working a third shift job. I'm going to work, and I just start having issues with nausea, vomiting, normal pregnancy stuff. And as I'm going through these different pregnancy symptoms, I realized, because again, I worked in the medical field, I'm dehydrated, and so I called my doctor's office and I told them, I said, I believe I'm dehydrated. I've been having a lot of nausea, vomiting. And so they asked me to come in. This was November 21st, 2007. They asked me to come into the office. I'm in this room. I'm sitting in this recliner chair hooked up to the IV, getting fluids, getting nausea medicine. He's sitting right there with me. The doctor comes in, and she comes in and she says, well, is it okay if I talk to you by yourself and then bring your husband back in after you and I have a conversation? Okay, sure. Didn't think anything of it. This happens. Doctors want to talk to patients alone sometimes. And so he steps out of the room and she begins to talk to me. She says, well, I got your labs back and everything looks fine except one thing. And I'm like, my initial thought is, okay, it's my diabetes, because with my oldest daughter, while I was pregnant with her, I had gestational diabetes toward the end of my pregnancy. So I'm like, okay, I'm pregnant. I'm getting ready to experience these diabetes all over again with pregnancy. And she's like, no, actually your glucose looks fine. It's not even diabetes. And so now I'm like, okay, what is she finna tell me? Like, all of these thoughts literally were running through my mind. And I'm just like, what? And so she looks at me like one of those friends you can have that wants to tell you something and they don't know how to tell you because they don't know how you're going to react. That's how she looked at me. And she said, well, your labs came back and they say that you're HIV positive. And in that moment, it was like in my head, watching a VHS tape. VHS tapes, in order to get back to the beginning, you have to rewind it. In my head, I'm at this moment of her saying this to me, and my brain is just rewinding like a VHS tape. And I'm thinking about what his mom said. I'm thinking about the doctor visit. I'm like, how is this even possible when we went? All of this is playing back to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm just numb. That's the only reaction I can ever tell anybody how I felt when that doctor told me that, is numb. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I just felt numb. And so she says, well, do you want me to bring your husband back in and you tell him or I tell him? I said, you tell him. I said, because if you're telling me that I'm HIV positive, then he's the reason why I'm HIV positive. So she brings him back into the room. She tells him. His reaction wasn't shocked. He wasn't, the typical reaction you would get from someone. It was not shocked. He was basically saying to her, well, we'll get through this and we'll work this out. And for me, that was like, okay, he knew. Like, that was the first time that told me, okay, he knows. And so we get in the car. He says to me, don't tell anybody. And then there's flag number 2. Okay, you don't want me to tell anybody. Now I know you really know. And again, I'm on nausea medicines. I just got these IV fluids. All I want to do is go home and sleep. So I didn't even process it, I don't think, that first day or couple days. It didn't really hit me until I was going back to work, to my third shift job. I'm driving and I just break down crying on the way to work because I held this in. I hadn't told anybody. And I'm now processing it. And I call my mom. I'm crying. She's like, what's wrong? And I'm explaining to her everything that's wrong. And it's just, I'm explaining to her. And she's like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're pregnant. You just got married. What are you thinking about doing? At that moment, the only thing I really was thinking about and what I wanted to do was to just get away from him at that moment. I wanted to just not be around him or deal with seeing his face at that moment. So I left South Carolina. The whole month of December, I was gone. And I came back to Florida, and I just used that time to clear my mind. I let my doctor know. I said, hey, I'll be gone. So you won't, if I need to come to an appointment, I need to have this appointment now before I go. I'll be gone however long. And so I didn't come back until 2 days after Christmas. So December 27th of 2007, I got back, and I basically went back because now I've had time to process everything. I've had time to think. I've had time to get clarity and figure out what I wanted to do. And so I went back with the one thing in mind, and that was to get all of my stuff that I owned and to leave. That was all I wanted to do. I knew at that moment I did not want to stay in that situation. I felt the ultimate betrayal.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, I felt the ultimate betrayal. And so I called my cousin, I called my friend. I said, hey, this is what's happening, what's going on. I need you guys to please come and help me move my furniture and my stuff. My friend allowed me to keep most of my big stuff at her house. Me and my parents went back at a later date and got that stuff. And whatever I could fit in my SUV at the time, I packed it in there. And, and this was on January 1st, 2008. I waited for him to go back to work. And I got my stuff and I left. Now, he was wanting me to come back. He was calling me every day, wanting me to come back. And at one point, honestly, I really did. I thought about it. And then I was like, what's wrong with you? Like, no.
So he was apologetic.
He was, I don't even think it was a genuine sense of apology. I think it was more so him knowing that he didn't tell me something he should have told me and the consequences of what could potentially happen.
Okay.
I think that's what really played on him at that point. Because again, I'm not physically there now. He doesn't know what I'm doing or what I'm thinking or seeing what I'm doing. Now, it got to a point where my aunt called me and said to turn on the news. I turned on the news. Here in Florida, there was a homosexual couple. The older male had knowingly infected the younger male, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for that third-degree felony crime. So at that point, I realized what happened to me was actually a crime. Now, I knew that there were certain statutes in place, different states, but being somebody who was never put in that situation, you don't think about it. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is a crime. Let me call the sheriff's office. I called the sheriff's office. I explained to them. And because my first thing was, well, I'm married. Is it even a crime because we're married? And they said, well, did he tell you prior to marriage? I said, no. I say, actually, he told me he was negative, and we went and got tested and sat in front of a doctor, and he told me he was negative. And so I had to do a written statement, give the police report. They investigated. I got a call back on Valentine's Day of 2008 from the sheriff's office asking me, would I get them consent to do a recorded confession? A recorded conversation with him to try to get some type of, because they had already investigated. So they honestly had everything they needed, but they wanted to have something solid from his own mouth. And so I say, yeah, I will allow you all to record the conversation. What questions do you need answered in our conversation? And so it was basically questions I was already asking him. When did you know you were positive? Why you didn't tell me? Do you know who infected you? Things like that. So I write these questions down, and I had to figure out, okay, how am I going to get him to even answer these questions? Now, he's wanting me to come back home. So I used the thing of, well, I have to go see a therapist or a psychologist because, they're wanting me to be mentally okay. And so I told him, I say, well, I have to go see a psychologist, and they give me these questions, but I don't know them because every time I ask you, you won't tell me. Now, again, because he's wanting me to come home, he's willing to answer all these questions now. So I go through the list of questions I'm asking him. He gives me every single answer, all the way up to where he tells me he knew his diagnosis August of 2002.
Oh, no.
Which was literally a full year before I had ever met him in life. And so, I was just like, what? I'm sitting there inside, like, wowing, like, just is he really telling me? Like, I'm getting these answers. So once I hung up with him, I said to the detective, I said, "You got it?" He said, "Oh yeah, I got it." So what they were able to do after that, along with them also investigating, with going to the health department's records and going into the database and seeing that he was in fact diagnosed, and having that information along with his word, issue a nationwide warrant for his arrest. So he was arrested in South Carolina. He was ultimately extradited back here to Florida.
Okay.
He was charged with that same charge that has a maximum 5-year sentence. It's a 3rd-degree felony. And before his sentencing hearing, he actually was pleading not guilty. And they said to him, and his lawyer had to let him know, well, listen, you're saying you're not guilty, and you're saying, well, how do I know she didn't give it to me? And his lawyer had to tell him, well, we know she didn't give it to you because she tested negative when you all went and got tested, and you are in the database for being diagnosed, and out of your own mouth on this recording, you're letting us know that you were diagnosed. So he ended up taking that back and ended up pleading guilty.
Okay.
So at his sentencing hearing, the judge had me stand in front of them, ask me these questions. I read a letter, and the judge looked at me, and the judge said, had he told you his status prior to you all having a relationship, getting married, all this stuff, would you have stayed with him? And I told the judge, I said, listen, I'm knowledgeable of this virus and this disease. Had he told me, I would have said, let's go together to make sure we both have a clear understanding of what we need to do to make sure that I remain negative. I said, but he didn't give me that option.
Correct.
And then the judge looked at him and said, well, why didn't you tell her? His reason was, well, everybody I ever told before her, they left me. They didn't want to be with me. And I loved her, and I cared about her, and I didn't want her to leave me. And the judge said, well, she left you. And now you're getting ready to go to prison. So he ended up serving 4 years in prison. He got 6 months of time served for being locked up already before the sentencing hearing. And then he got 6 months good behavior while he was incarcerated. And so 4 years was what he ended up serving. He was released March of 2012. As far as my pregnancy, I found I was pregnant with twins. And through the stress of my pregnancy, my twins were born extremely premature. I was only 23 weeks and 6 days pregnant. That's 1 day from being 6 months pregnant. So my twins were born 1 pound 6, 1 pound 7 ounces. They're now 14 years old. Okay. They're negative. They're negative. They're going to always be negative. And they have disabilities and things that I have to deal with them. Okay. But they're one of the main reasons. I know you asked me like what motivates me or what pushes me to really share my story. And it's the fact that these babies saved my life. Because I think about it. Had I not gotten pregnant when I did, I may not have known that I was positive until the next time I got tested. Because like I say, I only tested yearly.
Yes.
And so I may not have known till that following summer when I said, oh, it's time to go and get tested. So me getting pregnant with them when I did revealed everything. It revealed so much. So they're my push and my motivation of why I share this story. Because again, this can happen to anyone. Not just someone who's being promiscuous or someone who's an intravenous drug user. I was someone who got tested before marriage. I asked the questions. I did everything prior to marriage and through the marriage that I was supposed to do, and it still happened. And people always ask about the doctor. Well, through the investigation, come to find out, when I was in the room getting tested, and I thought he was in the other room getting tested, he was actually in the room with the doctor, and the doctor was letting him know, because this is his doctor that he's had for years. And the doctor's telling him, well, you know you're HIV positive. You need to disclose your status to her. And the doctor even offered to do it for him if he gave him consent. He didn't want to let the doctor do it. he told the doctor and reassured him, well, I'll let her know. I would definitely tell her. And he didn't do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He didn't tell me. And so all of this was revealed through investigations of me, once I was filed those charges.
And that's
Again,
because of the HIPAA laws that, yeah.
yeah, the HIPAA law and the Privacy Act are what stopped the doctor from being able to say anything to me.
Unless he
Unless he
consented.
consented
Right.
and told him, yes, you can tell her. Yeah. And so, yeah, so that's pretty much the story in the smallest form I can put it in.
Yes, you told it very well. Definitely. And I applaud you for having the courage to stand up to him. I mean, was that difficult? Did you receive pressure to not,
Oh
you know?
yeah.
Mhm.
So prior to us having this issue and his status coming out, I mean, I knew his whole family. I knew his sister, I
Mhm.
talked to his sister every day. His uncles, his aunt, cousins, relatives. Like, and once this happened, I was the bad guy.
Mhm.
Oh, you put his kids, they were teenagers, and oh, you put my dad in jail, and his mom was, oh, you doing this to my son, his sister's I was the bad guy, because their thing was, you should just stay with him. You both have this virus, just stay with him, but it was so much more to it, because
Oh, wow.
I was literally not his only victim.
Yeah.
Once I came open, more people surfaced who had either slept with him or slept with somebody who slept with him, because of the lifestyle he was choosing to live, of just sleeping around with people. And so, I had to just ignore them, cut them off. Literally to this day, there's only one person that I communicate with, who is his cousin.
Okay.
She and I still communicate. She has nothing really to do with him, and you know, we have a bond. She knows the kids. She, frequently asks about them. I can pick the phone up and call her at any moment.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's horrible. You should just stay together. I mean, that's a horrible microaggression to put on you, like with no care for your feelings or what you've been through or anything
Right.
like that. That's pretty messed up that they would say that to you, but it shows you when things like this happen, who is really, on your side.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And so you turn this story into, like you said, it saved your life, and you wanted to get the word out to others. How did you get started as far as the advocacy work?
So with the advocacy, I kind of, actually, I feel like I was slightly thrown into it.
Okay.
I was going to a support group. At the time I was still pregnant with the twins. So this had to be about February, early March. And I was asked if I would share my story to a group of pregnant women who were either also diagnosed or were at risk of being diagnosed. And
Mhm.
so I just, with no hesitation, I said, sure. And I went and I spoke to this group of pregnant women. And afterwards, so many people came up to me afterwards and just told me how, they, like, some of them, even I was the first person they had ever told, yes, I am positive as well.
Mhm.
And so to see people come up behind that and, disclose stuff to me that they've never told anybody, and just feel confident knowing that they're not alone because of me, I say, you know what? I have to do this. I have to continue to share my story. And that's what I've done ever since. And that was literally while I was still pregnant. So 2008.
Oh, that's amazing. And so soon after you had to process everything and deal with everything, you said you did seek out some counseling through a support group, though. And that
Right.
type of
Yeah.
thing, and that was a help to you, and that was a positive experience.
Yes, I honestly I found healing in sharing my story.
Hmm,
I did because it allowed me to not keep it bottled up. And
mhm.
I kind of understand now when I meet people who are positive and they don't disclose their status. Um, but it's just just to know that there are people who are afraid to tell the story, and they can see me be so open about it. It makes me comfortable to be able to just talk freely about it. It's not
Mhm.
like I'm hiding it. And for other people to see that, and know, okay, I'm not alone, even though I don't want to tell anybody, there's somebody right there. They're doing what I'm afraid to do or what I don't want to do, but they're there and I know they're there and I'm not by myself.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I can just tell that faith is important to you. Is it not? Yeah, your
It
faith.
is.
Mhm.
I'm slowly but surely getting back to a certain track. I want to say when it comes to faith, because I have went through quite a few different obstacles and things
Mhm.
that can kind of knock your faith a little bit.
Yeah.
So I would say for right now, I'm probably more on that spiritual side of things versus like religious. I mean, I grew up in church. My mom had me in church 6 days a week, probably.
Oh wow.
Growing up, and so I know things on a religious standpoint, but I think right now I'm just looking at things more of like you say, that faith, more like on a faith type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then you actually documented your story, and you have penned it off a book. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
So you actually have two books now, but that first book, that is kind of your story. Was it
Correct.
therapeutic putting that book together?
It was. So the first book is Married But It Can Happen. That's my autobiography. So it's basically the story I just told you in depth. Like when I say in depth, I take you all the way back to um my oldest daughter when I became pregnant with her, because that story too in itself, not that it has anything to do with the HIV or my diagnosis, but it has something to do with things that happen in general with
Mm-hmm.
life. I being a first time mom and dealing with that. I even go back to things I dealt with in middle school, high school, being bullied, you
Okay.
know. So I really take you on this journey of my life. I take you through a journey of um the first time I ever had sex after I was diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
After my diagnosis and moving on with life, how that felt, what it was like for me actually having serious relationships and dating after a diagnosis. I take you on that journey.
Okay.
So yeah, it definitely has been that book has a lot in it. Afterwards I was like, did I really just tell these people this? Like, and my parents did not find out the first time I ever had sex until they read my book.
Okay. Well,
So I was
okay.
like, girl, you crazy, but okay.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so that book is available on Amazon. Is that correct?
Yes, it's on
Okay.
Amazon. And I also do have physical copies that I can access. So I think physically I probably only have about 27 or 20, 26 or 27 physical copies left.
Okay.
But I usually order more books once a year around November, December. But again, if I don't have physical copies, definitely Amazon is the place you want to go. And if you
Okay.
want physical copies, I have a website that I can give where they can get the physical copy.
Okay, definitely. We'll have that link in the show notes for the for your website where they can purchase the physical copy of the book, and then the book is on Amazon as well where you can get the Kindle or the paperback as well. You have a second book as well that is also out here.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. That's
And
awesome.
the second book is a teen book. So I kind of wanted to do something for teens and young adults. So that book is HIV Around Me, and it basically just has 4 short stories in it. They're fictional. They're not necessarily based on anyone's specific life, but they are scenarios that can happen in the lives of teens and young adults. So I wanted to put that out there because what I included in it as well is education. I included introducing them to what is HIV, what is AIDS, what does it mean to be abstinent, what are these different things, terminologies when we talk about it. And I did it on their level, a teenager or young adults level. And the book is not very big. I kept it short. Attention spans in our teens and young adults are pretty much very minute. So I'm like, let's keep it simple for them. So that is available as well on Amazon.
Okay, definitely. Well, thank you for sharing that. We will have that listed as well in the show notes. And then, what do you want people to know about prevention and education? What can we give some information to the listeners about prevention, perhaps?
Yeah, so I feel like with prevention, the number one thing is you need to first know your status. That is always the number one thing for me, because how can you prevent something you don't know you have? So when you're going to your doctors, if you're someone who's married or in a committed relationship and have been for years, I still suggest getting tested at least once a year. When you go for your annual physicals, just say, hey, can you also add in HIV testing? Because they test other STDs when you go for your annual anyway. Just have them add that in there. And so do that. And then if it's someone who is having frequent sexual contact, every time you have a new partner, before you and that partner are engaging in any type of sexual activity, you want to know their status and you need to make sure they know yours. Go get tested.
Okay.
It's just always about testing. And then make sure you're using condoms for having sex. If you're having any type of oral sex, there are things and barriers that you can purchase for that.
Okay.
Just always, education is key. If you don't know, ask. There are free clinics in literally every city in the United States of America or anywhere that you're at where you can go and get this education. They have pamphlets, anything, websites. We come on websites and we look at YouTube and TikTok and everything else. We can go and Google some pertinent information.
Yes, you are on TikTok as well. I saw your video, which is pretty awesome. So I want to share that also in the show notes so people can tap in.
Yes, thank you.
Definitely. Yes, knowing your status is crucial so that, you can be aware and then you don't, spread to others unknowingly or otherwise. So
yes,
definitely want to do that. What should someone do if they think they may have been exposed to HIV?
If someone thinks they've been exposed, the first thing they want to do is you can go to an AIDS service organization or a public health clinic or the ER, and you can let them know, hey, I believe that I've possibly been exposed to the HIV virus. They have what's called PEP, that's post-exposure prophylaxis. So what they'll do is they will get some blood, not test you because it will be way too soon to test you for HIV, but they will get your blood, run it against the medications, make sure there's not a medication you're resistant to, and they will give you maybe 1 pill or 2 pills to take for so many days as a preventative. This is to kind of help prevent the possible exposure that could have happened. Okay. Then they'll bring you back in 3 months' time, because in reality, it takes anywhere from it can be, I'm really stretching it when I say 8 weeks, like 2 months. I would say closer to 3 months it can take for the virus to fully show up when you go and get tested. So they'll bring you back in, test you. If that first test is negative, they'll bring you back in 3 more months. So at your 6 months of being exposed, they'll test you again. Usually if that test is negative, you're going to be negative. They're not going to require you to get tested again. But
Okay.
for any reason you do end up testing positive, they're going to connect you to the correct, the proper resources to get you medications, find out what help you need if you don't have insurance, whatever it is, they're going to put you in the right steps and position.
Okay, definitely. So you want to definitely act soon and
Yes.
not later if you just have the thought that maybe, you have a feeling that maybe that you've been in contact, go and get seen at the doctor is what.
Yes,
Okay, for
absolutely.
sure. Definitely. And so, please let us know how people can reach out to you.
Yes, so the easiest way, and I just recently made this super, super easy. My website is ladybirdofficial.com.
Okay.
And when you go to my website, there, if you scroll down, the book is right there on the homepage. And as well on the homepage, there's a link that says social media, where you can find me on all my social media. So when you click on it, it's going to give you every social media app link that I'm on, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Clubhouse,
Okay.
what did I say? TikTok. I even do a radio show on AMP app.
Oh, nice.
Um,
Okay.
and that one is just me having fun, because I try to make sure people know, yes, I'm this serious advocate and I put this information out here, but I like to have fun too. So I just play music,
Oh, awesome.
and do that. So it's going to give you all my links on ladybirdofficial.com.
Okay, we will have that posted as well. Renee, I really appreciate you. God bless you. Much success in everything that you're doing. I heard you speaking on Clubhouse, so please keep it up. I think that really resonated with the community, and I think this is really going to be awesome. So I just wish everything great for you, and I just appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for having me too. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And we thank you guys for listening. Take care, guys.